Meat consumption in the United States is something most Americans can't get rid of in their diet. Currently, the United States is in second place, short of Hong Kong for the most meat consumed. Many Americans don't stop to look at what their meat is made of or where it is coming from anymore. But the meat industries have a rich history of hiding specifics from consumers, taking advantage of customers, and not caring for the safety and quality of the meat they produce. Of course, scandals have occurred over the decades, but one of the most important and influential was during the jungle fever of the 1900s. Americans had a right to information about food products, and companies were responsible for truthfully telling the consumers what they were eating.
Porkopolis. In the 1800s, Porkopolis, today known as Cincinnati, was the largest pork-producing city in the world. Some might say that this is where all the meat packing factories began. A large immigrant workforce, readily available salt, and a good amount of cattle and hogs helped make Cincinnati the place to be during this time. But soon, during the Civil War, Chicago took the lead in pork production and other meat products, leaving Porkopolis behind. Chicago's central location, railroad availability, and proximity to the Midwest farms made it the perfect area to boom in the meatpacking industry.
Chicago's Union Stockyards. In the 1900s, everyone was competing to be the main producer and distributor of meat. Union Stockyards at Chicago were in the middle of all of it, and their slaughterhouses ended up defining the era of meat production. The Union Stockyard is 9 railroad companies that came together to have a centralized stockyard that had 320 acres outside of Chicago. Cattle, hogs, and sheep would be transported through railroad cars and put into pens. Before all of this, animals would usually be born in the same state where they would be butchered and sold. Now, with the Union Stockyard of Chicago, an animal could be born in one state and then sold and sent all the way to Chicago, where it would be butchered there and sold or shipped somewhere else. This allowed for both rich and poor families to have the luxury of meat at their dinner tables. The downside to this was they wanted to do everything cheaply, quickly, and get a good revenue. They didn't want to pay their workers a lot, so they looked for desperate workers, the immigrants. They don't have time to sanitize or get rid of rats, so they would cover rotten meat and sell it. The work conditions were definitely not ideal in this place, but people had no other choice. They needed work. That is what led to Upton Sinclair to go undercover for 2 months in this place. It was to help the workforce have better work conditions and show America how horrible their work life was. Through all of this, he ended up accidentally exposing what's really in America's meat.
The jungle. On February 10, 1906, chaos had broken out in all the papers. There were headlines of a meat scandal being uncovered in a book. The book was The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, in which he told stories about rats infestation, diseases in the meat, rotten meat being sold, and some human body parts being mixed in with the meat. This made Americans sick to their stomachs. They were mad for not being informed what was really in their meat. In one of the stories, it talks about how a man was supposed to take all the cattle that had been injured or died on their way to the slaughterhouse and put it in an elevator where it would be disposed of. This man discovered the meat was not being disposed of. It was getting disguised and put into the chilling rooms with all the other meat. When the meat was spoiled, they did not want to get rid of it either. They would tell the workers to put it in a can or make it into sausage. If the rotting smell was too strong, they were told to put soda on it. Sometimes they would soak meat in borax and glycerin so you wouldn't know it was rotten. Meat was also thrown on the ground where there would be sawdust and all kinds of bacteria. Then they would be stored in dark rooms on the floor where rats would climb all over it, leaving little rat droppings. Of course, the workers didn't have time to brush off these rat droppings, so they would stay. One of the stories that disgusted many was about the men that worked in the tank rooms. The tank rooms were rooms full of steam, and in some there were open vats near the floor. These rooms were where they turned meat into durum pure leaf lard. Sadly, workers who had been tired would accidentally fall into the vats. When other workers would finally get them out, there would be barely anything left of their body, which means some of their body parts were made into lard, and it would still be put on the shelves to be sold. This means many humans were probably accidental cannibalists because of this. After reading all the horrifying stories of America's meat, citizens were very angry and were crying for a change.
Neil Reynolds Report. Due to the public outcry and scandal that the jungle had caused, Theodore Roosevelt sent Charles P. Neal and James Bronson Reynolds to investigate Sinclair's claims and see if they were real. Once they had completed their work, they returned with evidence that found Sinclair's findings were true. In their report, they said that they saw meat shoveled from room to room in rotten box carts, in all of which processes it was in the way of gathering dirt, splinters, floor filth, and the expectoration of tuberculosis and other diseased workers. They also stated in their report that the insanitary conditions in which the laborers work and the feverish pace which they are forced to maintain inevitably affect their health. Meat packers, when asked, said that scrupulous cleanliness is ordered and enforced. Taking into consideration both accounts, the American people only wanted to know the truth of what was happening.
The Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906. As a result of Neil Reynolds' report and Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, in which specifically Chapter 14 describes and illustrates the atrocious and horrendous lack of sanitation in the Chicago slaughterhouse. Americans across the U.S. spoke up in public protest against the unsanitary conditions and inadequate inspection so that the government would do something. They wanted companies to truthfully tell them what they were consuming. Americans had a right to know. Finally, due to the widespread public concern about unsanitary conditions in meatpacking plants, Theodore Roosevelt was forced to pass the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906. This act was crucial to closing the gap between the rights and responsibilities that consumers and companies have. The Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906 was passed to prevent adulterated and misbranded meat products from being sold as food and to ensure that meats and meat products are slaughtered and processed under sanitary conditions. The Act also requires covered meat products to be labeled and packaged in accordance with the Act to regulate commerce and protect the safety and health of consumers. The Federal Meat Inspection Act played a crucial role in making sure companies upheld their responsibilities to American people.
Amongst the Federal Meat Inspection Act was also the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The meat scandal not only served as a basis for the government to do something, but it set a standard for the people to expect more out of producers. More publicity was brought upon the food industry in general. The outcome of the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906 and the whole meat scandal raised up the expectation and responsibility of companies to provide their customers the truth and honesty they deserved.